We've shrunk our average branch size from about 5,000 square foot to just over 2,500. Because it's a centralized teller group that services these transactions, we've actually expanded our service hours by over 60%.
For most community FIs, the role new branches play in growth and expansion can be contentious. From competing pressures to invest in digital channels to sometimes eye watering real estate and development costs, some are choosing to sit it out. Not for our guest today, Matt Jernigan. Matt is the president and CEO of Ascend Federal Credit Union. Ascend is a $4+ billion credit union serving Middle Tennessee, and they've recently opened their 28th branch. Matt, thanks for being with us today.
Yes, thank you, Richard. Thank you so much for having me on today.
So I think first it's worth talking about where you are in the world and the type of market you fit, and we can get into kind of why branch expansion still makes sense for you.
Certainly. Well, as you mentioned, we serve the Middle Tennessee market. It's still, kind of a mix of rural and also large metro areas. So it's a very balanced market that we serve in the different communities. We're certainly very community focused. It's part of everything we do. We make a very pointed part of our strategy to be visible members of our community. So I think the branch and being visible, being recognized, that's a component of who we are as being that neighbor as a financial institution. So I think our branch strategy plays into, again, part of who we are as a brand and being that visible neighbor in the community.
And your charter is community or geography based?
We're multi-segment, so that means select employee groups, and then we also have some associations as well. So, very open membership from that perspective, and again, targeting primarily the Middle Tennessee market.
So, like we mentioned in the intro, you recently opened your 28th branch. Um, what went into like that idea? Was this just like, hey, here's another one and it's ongoing part of what we're doing? Or was there something special around the decision to kind of go about that route?
It's been part of a multi-year strategy to again strengthen and expand our branch footprint. The one we added is in a city, Murfreesboro, Tennessee, which again is in our marketplace. One of the strategic elements of Murfreesboro and why it's important to us, it is the home of Middle Tennessee State University, so MTSU. That's a critical strategic partner as well from a standpoint of, again, trying to partner with college students, with our focus on financial literacy. So again, part of our strategy there is deploying branches within the marketplace where we already have other strategic partners, such as these university partnerships. And that's true for a number of locations in our market.
So why branches versus something else, right? Like we kind of set up in the beginning, you see a lot of particularly smaller credit unions pulling back from their physical presence to look at things like digital experience, looking at, the quote unquote digital branch or the other channels. Why does this continue to make sense for your communities and your members?
That's a really good question. And, really around kind of our executive table, we really do not view it as a contentious debate of is it digital or is it from a delivery channel. Long ago, we really felt like the digital experience, the digital delivery channel, it's complementary and it's in addition to what we offer. We offer a very robust, even if you think of banking by telephone, that's still a very relevant. So, throughout the history of our industry, I think you've seen a continued addition of channels versus, really a replacement of one channel versus the other. Now, I will say how the branch is designed, what, its make, look, feel, and why our members are coming to branches has certainly changed over the year. We've been very strategic and very proactive and kind of redesigning and rethinking, how we design our branches. And again, knowing that the branch is no longer a transactional place, it is more of a consultative place. So our branches very much have taken on that look and feel from a design standpoint as well.
So what are some examples of that? Like how is like that use case changed into the architecture, the technology you put in there, et cetera? What's different about the new branches you're creating today or planning to create versus 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago?
Yeah, probably one of the biggest changes we've made over the last decade was the introduction of video teller machines. So again, these are transaction points, just as you would think, traditional where you make deposits, cash withdrawals, those types of things. But the interesting thing when you deploy video tellers, you reduce the footprint size. So I would say over the last decade, we've shrunk our average branch size from about 5,000 square foot to just over 2,500. So you reduce the need for vaults in your branches. You can actually, all the square footage that's allotted to a traditional teller line, some of the security elements. And, from a member benefit standpoint, because it's a centralized teller group that services these transactions, we've actually expanded our service hours by over 60% when you compare to kind of the standard transaction access at local community banks. So it's really a case of, again, deploying technology into that kind of legacy uh, channel of a branch, but then doing so to give the members an overall better experience.
So, from that standpoint, how much is this change in design, the experience you're creating, how much of that is driven by cost considerations versus customer preference or member behavior?
Yeah, that's a key strategic balance. We certainly want to be member focused first. That's who we are as a community institution, but then also as a credit union, our members come first. So we prioritize every decision we make with the members' needs and focus first. But certainly we also realize that capital belongs to the members as well. So we have to be cost conscientious. That's kind of what I was referencing earlier. We're constantly rethinking the branch design and trying to press on that square footage investment and knowing that we can deploy branches more quickly, more efficiently with this type of design as we evolve and leverage the technological advancements that are happening, but deploying those actually in the branch.
When you look at the trend of branches overall, and I believe there's a report, and I'll put a link in the show notes about it from the Fed on just the sheer number of branches in the US and how the combination between branches closing, different banks and credit unions merging together and reducing their overall footprint, it has come down considerably in the past 5 to 6 years, but is maybe leveling out. Do you see that as a correction to what's needed, or is that relevant to you and your market to Middle Tennessee, or is like real estate, everything's local, right? Is it that type of situation?
Well, I certainly think it's definitely a trend we're seeing in the macro industry overall. So certainly, and I would also say that's one of the motivating factors for us to continue to deploy the branch. We do think consolidation is going to continue to happen. And one of the byproducts that I think is negative for consumers is the creation of what I would term banking deserts, especially in rural communities where they lose that access to service. So that is one of the motivating factors of our strategy. And, you mentioned a good point about net contraction, and it's very regionalized. One of the examples I would point to specifically in our market, JP Morgan Chase, when you think of Nashville, I mean, it's one of the largest cities in the Southeast and the country overall, and experiencing great growth. But JP Morgan Chase just opened their first Nashville location in 2020. And when you think of how large they are, and they've contracted their network almost 200 branches nationally, but they've taken from one branch in 2020 to 11 in 2023. So I think you're seeing kind of a right sizing and shifting from a regional perspective across even what I would term the national banks, getting into new markets and kind of reallocating their branch strategy.
So when thinking about your current plans, where you are, do you have more branches planned? Like, is this continue to be a strategy you're going after? If so, how do you balance it against other approaches or other strategies that you could pursue?
Yeah, it's a really good question. As I mentioned earlier, it's kind of that balanced strategy of member need and cost. So certainly the branch continues to be the most visible and opportunistic way for us to go into a new branch and really build that brand awareness. So branch relevance continue to be very smart from a standpoint of making sure we're not overlapping or, getting too much branch density in the same population areas. But again, our branching strategy will still be focused on going into new market and then certainly kind of strengthening our position in those rural markets. So Again, I think strategically, we've always viewed a trade area relevant to a branch in a 3 to 5 mile radius. I do see that changing more to 5, 7, maybe even out to 10-mile radius in the future, but it'll continue to be a key part of our strategy.
Yeah, on the technology side, you said you've deployed. Now, are you deploying ITMs or like the video teller solution?
Correct. IT.
ITMs. Okay. Is that a new branch only approach, or are you doing that across the board?
Oh, we're strategically retrofitting and again monitoring, where transactions are in the decline, where it makes sense, and again where we think the trade-off from a traditional experience to kind of the more modern experience and expanding those service hours makes sense. I think we're down to 3 or 4 locations that still have more of the traditional teller services, but we will be retrofitting those in the future.
And are you changing the complete design of the branch at that point? Or is it just, hey, we're going to add this as an additional capability?
Yes, as we add this capability, certainly it takes a smaller footprint overall from a transactional standpoint. So we'll be deploying more consultative offices and things like that, expanding, you know, certainly you give more square footage now to investment advisory services, real estate, loan origination, things like that. So it's repurposing that square footage again, recognizing where we can reallocate away from transactions, and then again what the need and what the demand is from a consultative standpoint.
So your footprint in Middle Tennessee, this pretty diverse environment that you're going after, but both kind of even more urban approach when you start thinking about like the Nashville area all the way out to the ruralists from a Tennessee standpoint. How does that impact that idea, the design, obviously the footprint, the radius around there, but how are you approaching that, the different needs, the different density approach to what you're doing with how you think about the rollout, how you think about the level of technology, like the use of ITMs, et cetera. How does that impact? How does it look different depending on where you are?
Yeah, it's certain, and I think it's been one of the factors of, kind of again being very strategic about some of the retrofits, being mindful of, population mix, again, demographic segmentation. So we're looking at all of those things when we deploy and kind of what where the alignment is from a product and a member need standpoint and making sure we have those resources. Certainly in lower income communities, trying to again dedicate more resources to financial literacy. So creating kind of, I'd say, a multi uh, multi delivery strategy where what is the need for that market and being very adaptive to the diverse needs of each marketplace. So it's not a certainly not a one size fits all. Being very adaptable based on what the community need is.
So when you think about growth and this growth that you're addressing through branches, how much of that are you seeing, at least in your areas, being driven just by population growth versus the pullback of competitors or alternatives versus different macroeconomic factors that are kind of affecting your members?
Certainly, I think it's a combination of both. Middle Tennessee continues to be a very popular area, again, from out of state migration. So a lot of it is, again, just trying to be responsive to that natural uh, growth in population and certainly looking at branch density as a key metric that we're looking at from that standpoint as well. But yes, I'd say second, very close behind that is, again, looking at that. Um, Mission driven strategic approach from, we're there to serve the underserved. So one of the things we look at as a credit union is adding underserved marketplaces again where there's lack of access to traditional financial services. So I would say it's kind of a 1A, 1B strategy from a standpoint of again being responsive to just the natural macroeconomics of population growth, but then also being true to who we are from serving the underserved community.
So considering your size and, the resources that you have available, how much of this, when you think about your expansion, is this, it becomes a core competence that you're doing inside versus you're getting really good at vendor selection, right? I mean, you think about scale. When you have several dozen locations, certain things begin to make sense for you to do your own. When you think of this from, I don't know if it's like straight up real estate or development or what you're doing standpoint. Hey, how much of this is inside versus outside, right? Versus buy versus build, if you want to start thinking of it like from that standpoint.
Yeah, I would say probably one of the biggest changes we've made in that space is, again, with a reduction of square footage. Back when we were building, the typical branch would be in the 5,000 square foot. We were building all those ground up builds. I would say at least 75% of our new branches over the last decade have been inline shopping center leases. So we've really shifted from that standpoint of let someone else build the real estate for us. We'll take on the lease. And what it does allow too is, we can go in with leases 5, 7 years and do test markets too. So it gives us, again, short ramp up period, test period. And then if we do need, and we haven't had this need yet, but if we need to exit a market, then it gives us a good exit strategy as well. So I think it's a good, again, for speed of deployment and then also that ability to test and see where we're effective.
So from an infrastructure standpoint, and that's not just the square footage, but everything that goes in there, as well. What has been maybe the hard part or the bottlenecks? What's kind of difficult when you think about expanding from that standpoint?
Yeah, that's a really good question. As I mentioned, kind of now deploying this, inline retail shop type space. The challenge there is again being very adaptable from a standpoint. If we've got a model that looks like, you know, X number of member offices, ITMs deployed here, you've got to be very versatile. If you're going into kind of a, more of a shotgun type office thing in a retail center, that looks one way if it's more kind of a square. So even from that standpoint of just mapping out, the member journey within the space itself, uh, we've really, I think that's been one of the challenges of kind of taking this, what we've called a kit of parts and then being able to deploy that in any number of square footage arrangement.
So who are the key people involved in this? Whether it's all internal or it's partners, what are the really important skills that you've had to rely on that really make a difference for you?
Yeah, I think one of the key things is the outside architecture firm that we use. We've got a very strong relationship with them. Uh, Very, very good communication between them and our marketing department of, again, the brand elements and how you execute that and get that right in every deployment. So, um, I think, again, constantly having consistency across our third party providers, all of the internal stakeholders kind of know their role in the playbook. So we've really perfected this down to, a science from a playbook standpoint. Our facilities team knows kind of what their runway is. IT knows when they're going to be on site, again, to work with vendor deployment of technologies and then certainly branding elements as well. So it's getting everybody on the same page. And I think that's one of the beauties from the strategy, again, using more of the lease space. Uh, we're just able to just drive so much consistency and it's just, kind of a rinse and repeat, once you have the process, down.
How how is like the municipal element, local government, zoning, trade, et cetera? Have you found that to be more, I guess, maybe permissive or restrictive, right? Are they pushing you or are they holding you back from that standpoint?
Say, it obviously varies by municipality. And as we go into a new market, there's certainly more challenges. But I think once we've, introduced our concepts, our branches look just phenomenal. I mean, I'm obviously biased, but I certainly think they're, from an aesthetic standpoint, an improvement in a lot of the centers that we go in. So I think once they know our brand, know what we're about, understand certainly what we're bringing to the community, we found it to be a great relationship and it moves very quickly once we have that established relationship. So that really has not been a hurdle for us.
I'll say that's not a consistent story we hear from a lot of different FIs. So uh, consider yourself lucky, I guess. But Matt, this has been an interesting discussion to really hear what I think when you look at a larger trend standpoint is a contra example of what's going on. So if people want to learn more about Ascend or what you're doing or your plans, where can they go to get more information?
Yes, certainly you can go to send.org to find out more about us and find the closest location nearest to you. So again, we're available online and then also lean very heavily on our branch network.
And we'll put links to all that in the show notes. Matt, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you again. Really appreciate it.